Alright guys, welcome back. So today we're going to be taking a look at how to build an inventory system in GameMaker. Now, I've thought about this topic for a long time, and I've thought about how I might do it from various different genre contexts, like how you might do an inventory for an RPG, or a platformer, or for a point-and-click adventure game, and various different things. But what I've decided to do for this video is try and do an inventory system with essentially no context, to show you the bare basics of just setting up a system and setting up an object that will track your inventory and the objects in your inventory, as well as how to use code to add items to your inventory and remove items from your inventory, and to check if an item is in your inventory, and then hopefully with those tools at your disposal you'll be able to kind of adjust this very simple but pretty versatile system to fit into pretty much whatever type of game you're working on. Now, because I'm doing this tutorial independently of any specific game context, I'm not going to be showing the absolute specifics of how you would set up the inventory to be displayed and interacted with, and how you could click on a sword on the ground and pick that up and put it in your inventory, because all that stuff is going to be specific to the game you're making, like all the stuff of how you click on one item in your inventory and move it to another place and stuff, all that kind of stuff. It really depends on what it is you're making. But what I will show you is the basics of how to interact with this inventory in general, so that you'll be able to hopefully adjust and expand the system to fit into whatever specific type of game you're making. It should be very clear how this works later on. So let's quickly walk through all of the resources that we've added to the project so far. There isn't really very much. I've got two sprites up here, one called SPR_border. It's just a little white box with transparency in it. I'm just using as a very simple thing that's going to show. We're just going to draw to represent the slots of our inventory on the screen. I'm just doing that really at a basic level, just so that you can see the inventory working more than anything. We're not really going to be covering too much of how to present the inventory. That will be more up to you guys. But that's there for that. And SPR_items. Now, this sprite is important and contains essentially the icons for every item we want to have in the game. Now, I've stored essentially every item in the game in one sprite called SPR_items as individual frames of that sprite. Now, normally you would use frames of a sprite to store an animation, right? But here we're using that same system differently, and we're just going to use every single frame of this one sprite to store a different item icon. And the only other thing we need in here is RM_1. We'll just have a room. Nothing in it yet. So that's all I have right now. And the very first thing I'm going to do is create our inventory object, the object that we're going to use to track our inventory and to essentially manage everything to do with our inventory. So go ahead and object, so I'm going to hit create object. I'm going to call this obj_inventory. Doesn't need a sprite, so it doesn't need to be visible either. But I am going to mark it as persistent, so that it carries over between rooms. So if we change rooms, change levels, this object is going to stick around. And I'm just going to reduce the depth to a generic minus value. It's not going to matter because we're not going to have any other objects in the game. But the reason I'm doing that would be so that if in theory we had a player object or something like that, in theory when we have the rest of the game in the game, we would want the inventory to probably draw over the top of everything else, because it's an element of the UI. So by setting it to a really low depth, that ensures that it's drawing, when it draws the inventory on the screen, it's going to draw in front of everything else. So the first thing we want to do in here, it's what we're probably all used to by now, is going to events, add event, and add the create event, our favorite. Then go to control and drag in our favorite action, execute code, and here we are back at our lovely code editor. The first thing I'm going to do is just make a comment block to remind myself which item is which number. As you remember, we have our sprite. Each different frame represents a different item. So we need to know which one of those images represents what item. I'm just going to create a comment block by doing and then asterisk, and then down here asterisk slash, and then you'll notice anything I type in the middle of here turns green, and I've just created a block comment. So like anything outside of this is regular code, and everything in here is just a comment and won't get interpreted by the game's code. So in here I'm just going to type inventory items. You don't need to do this, by the way, this is just as a thing to help out. 0 was our sword, 1 was our red potion, 2 was the blue potion, and 3 was the yellow key. So those are our items. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is just establish a couple of global variables for our inventory object. And now you may have seen me establish global variables before by typing in global and then whatever the name of that variable is, which works. What I'm going to do this time for these specific global variables is actually going to use global var instead. Now this does essentially exactly the same thing, only I don't have to specify a value to initialize it to right away. I'm going to create a global variable called showInv, which is going to be a variable we just use to control whether or not we're currently showing the inventory on the screen. I can even comment that, so we know what that does. And then underneath I'm just going to set it to true. Now the reason I've used that this time mostly was just to demonstrate the difference in this tutorial, is that now, as you'll see when I assigned it underneath, this is a global variable and works just like previous global variables in that it's very easy for objects that other objects and other code to interact with this variable, as opposed to local variables where only this specific object knows that that variable exists. But usually when I do something like, if I did global showInv equals such and such, whenever I wanted to refer to that variable again, I would have to type global.showInv every time. Whereas having established this as a global var using this, all I have to do is write showInv and it knows, and it will work in any object or in any script. After this has been initialized, the game knows that this is a global variable at that point and will be able to reach it and access it from anywhere. Which really, at the end of the day, just saves you writing global dot over and over. But anyway, all that variable is there for us to just track whether or not we're showing the inventory on the screen at any point in time. The next one, global var max items, is just going to control the number of slots, the total item slots that we have for our inventory. Depending how your game works, I guess that figure might change over time, but it's just important for us to track the maximum number of items that we want to store. And I'm just going to keep it really low just to be simple. I'm just going to set it to 5. Now that we know how many items we want to store, what we're going to do is create essentially a number of variables to store which item is in which slot at any one point in time. Now, we're not going to do what you might imagine and say, like, item slot 1 equals 2, item slot 2 equals item slot 3 equals whatever, and so on and so forth. That would be, like, really unmanageable. Like, it's really hard to then know to refer to specific item slots. You've got to recall the specific name of the item slot and so on. What we're going to do is use an array to store what item is in which slot of our inventory. An array, you can think of it as multiple variables inside one variable, or a sequence of variables stored inside essentially one word. And how that works is we write the name of our variable and then put a number in square brackets after that variable. So I could write inventory square brackets 0 to represent the very first entry of the array equals 1. And then I could also write inventory 1 equals 1, and so on and so forth. Inventory 2 equals 1, and so on and so forth. And now these are all essentially variables in their own right. Like they're like three different variables, they all equal 1 because I can change that or whatever. But the main difference here between doing this and, as I said, doing, say, item slot 1 equals 2, item slot 2 equals 4, etc. The main difference between doing this and doing this, what I've got set up here, is that when I'm referring to this array later, I can control much more easily control which slot I'm referring to. So if I have a variable that says slot equals 4, for example, I could do an if statement after that that said if inventory, and then in the square brackets wrote slot equals I don't know, 10 or whatever, and then write some code after that, and that would it would take slot, which equals 4, and it would find the 4th entry in array, which we didn't set, but say that one was 4, for example, and check to see if it equals 10, which is much easier, like if we're choosing a specific slot, than having to say, oh, if slot equals 4 and the name for our 4th inventory slot was item slot 4, it wouldn't help us, because like we can say it'd be much harder to find which variable we want to check. So this is why we're using an array to store our items in specific slots. Now, in order to set up that array, what I could do is I could just say inventory as I did here. Inventory 0 equals -1. We're going to use -1 to store the idea of having no item in a specific slot. So when there's no item in a slot, the variable is going to be -1, because otherwise we want it to be either 0, 1, 2, or 3. One of this is going to be either sword, red potion, blue potion, or yellow key if there is an item, and if there's no item, -1 will be the figure. Now, we could establish our inventory of 5 items like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's from 0 to 4, so there's 5 items there, and we set them all to be blank. That would work, but that's kind of, again, makes things much harder to manage for us. Like, what if we want to change this later to 50? Say that right, or suddenly then we've got to add like 50 more of this line, saying these to be all -1. That's a lot of hard work. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a for loop to set up our inventory for us. So I'm going to write for I equals 0, semicolon, I less than max items, semicolon, I plus equal 1, close bracket, open a curly brace, and close a curly brace. Now, what a for loop does is it's going to loop any code that's in here a certain number of times. Now, given that it's setting a arbitrary variable here, I, to be 0, it's going to continue, based on I being 0, to loop any code inside these square brackets until this condition is no longer true. So at the moment the condition is I, this arbitrary variable that we set to 0, is less than max items being 5 right now. So while I is less than 5, which it is, it's 0, so while I is less than 5, loop this code. But every single time it loops this code, it's going to perform this thing on the end here, which is I plus equals 1. So it's going to add 1 to I every single time it loops this code until I is bigger than max items, at which point the loop will stop. So if you followed all that, you should understand that this for loop is going to loop exactly 5 times. It's going to loop once with I equals 0, then with I equals 1, then with I equals 2, then with I equals 3, then with I equals 4, and then after it's finished with I equals 4, it'll do I plus equals 1, I will become 5, and I will now be equal to max items, therefore I less than max items will no longer be true, and the for loop will stop. If you want to learn more about for loops, like you want a more detailed explanation, just middle click on for, or just go to the for statement in the index, and there's a good explanation of it there. So the next piece of code I'm going to put in here is I'm just going to say, as we were doing before, inventory open square bracket I equals -1. So now instead of having to write inventory 0 equals -1, inventory 1 equals -1, and so on and so forth, we can just write inventory I inside of this for loop, and because we know I is going to increment all the way from 0 to 4, it's going to do inventory 0 equals -1, then it's going to do inventory 1 equals -1, inventory 2 equals -1, and so on and so forth. The only other change I'm going to make to this is I'm going to put global dot in front of this, so that we establish this as a global array. Therefore, it makes it easier for us because we can access it from anywhere in the game. And that's it. So we've essentially, with this code here, like really short amount of code, it's like 8 lines, we've set up our object, and we've created 5 blank item slots. And we can easily change it, like if I just set that to 8 or whatever, we would have 8 blank item slots, but we're just going to stick with 5 for now. Now that we have those item slots available, the next thing I'm going to do is just set it up so our inventory can draw the contents of our inventory to the screen, even though we haven't actually added anything to the inventory yet. So I'm going to add the draw event, drag in code, and first of all in here I'm just going to say if show inv. This is what allows that variable to work. You remember the global variable show inv that we set up in the create event? It's set to true. It means we can set that to false anytime, and the game will skip over our draw event entirely and not render any of this stuff to the screen. And then we can just turn it back on when we do want to draw the inventory, and so on. Really simple. Now in here I'm just gonna do some very simple kind of drawing stuff to just draw a black rectangle at the top of the screen, which is where we're going to draw all our inventory and stuff. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to type var x1, x2, y1, and y2. Now what I'm doing here is I'm going to set up 4 coordinates that will eventually combine to give us a rectangle of space. So we want the left hand side of that rectangle, the right hand side of that rectangle, the top and the bottom. And we're just going to store them in local variables just to make things easy. X1, so the left side, is going to be wherever our camera is right now. So view, x view, brackets 0. I could have just set that to 0 to be like the top left corner of the room, but the reason I'm using this view underscore x view 0 instead is so it tracks wherever the camera happens to be if you're using camera moving around the room. Otherwise, by default, if you haven't set up views, view x view will be still the top left corner of your screen. So x2 is going to be the right hand side of the screen, so it's going to be the same as x1, so wherever our camera is now, plus however wide our viewport is. So view w view for width 0, because it's camera number 0. Y1, so the top of our rectangle, is just going to be wherever the camera is, so view underscore y view 0. Y2 is going to be the same as Y1, so the top of the screen, plus like however tall we want this rectangle to be. I'm just going to say 64, really arbitrarily. This stuff here isn't that really important to the inventory system itself. It's just because it'll change depending on how you want to draw it. This is just a simple way of getting it on the screen. It's going to say draw set color to be black, just setting our drawing color to be black, and then set the transparency of our drawing tool to be 0.8, so like a little bit transparent. And I'm just going to draw a rectangle x1, y1, no, yes, y1, x2, and y2 for the next coordinates. You can see at the bottom, those are the ones it's asking for. And then outline, it wants to know whether or not this is a filled rectangle or just an outline of a rectangle. We want a full rectangle, so it's not an outline. So I put 0 in there for outline. And then set my transparency back to 1. So, I mean, I can show that rectangle just working now. If I just pop into the room that I made and just stick inventory in the middle, it's going to establish all those blank slots for our inventory, and that's just going to draw a blank rectangle at the top of the screen. or it's not because the inventory object is marked as not visible. I did tell you guys to mark that as invisible at the start. I apologize, go ahead and set that back to visible, it does need to be. So I close it now, run that again. And there you go, black rectangle, top of the screen, not much to look at yet, but we're getting there. So now that we're drawing this black rectangle where we want our inventory to be, the next thing I'm going to do is use a for loop to draw the actual slots of our inventory and draw any items that happen to be in our inventory. So I'm going to say for, again, I equals 0, I less than max items, again, so we're just going to cycle from 0 up until the maximum number of items we can carry. I plus equal 1, the exact same setup for this for loop as we had before. Now in here, the first thing I'm going to do is for each item I'm going to draw that border, the border sprite. So draw sprite SBR underscore border. And now for the x coordinate, what I'm going to, oh actually the sub image is going to be 0. Yeah, there's only one frame of that sprite. But for the x and y coordinate, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say use, first of all, x1, I'm just going to use these coordinates up here which determine where the box is. Plus 24 arbitrarily, just to space it out a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is add I multiplied by 40. Now, what I've done there is I've taken whichever slot we're drawing so far, I'm using that multiplied by 40 to add to the x coordinate of where we're drawing each one of these borders. Because this line of code here is going to be repeated 5 times. We're going to draw this border in 5 times, and we're going to draw it in 5 different places. And the only thing that's different every time this loop happens is I increases by 1. So we can use that multiplied by another value, in this case 40, to space out our borders along by however much we put in here. So these are all going to be about 40 pixels apart from one another. The first one's going to be placed at x1 plus 24 plus 0 times 40, so just x1 plus 24. Then the next one's going to be put at x1 plus 24 plus 1 times 40, then plus 2 times 40, then plus 3, and so on and so forth. And you can see how that's going to space them out horizontally over this blank box. And then vertically they can all be lined up. We're just drawing one row here, so I'm going to do y2 minus 24. Again, arbitrary value just specific to this rectangle that I've got set up here. It'll be different depending on what you're doing. Then the next thing I'm going to do is check to see whether or not the I value we're at is a slot in the inventory where we have an item that needs drawing. So I'm going to say if global.inventory and square brackets I, so if this specific slot of the inventory does not equal -1, because as you know before we set all of those slots to be -1 when we made the object, which means that those slots are empty. So if they don't equal -1, it means they have an item in them and we need to draw it. So I'm going to say draw sprite SPR underscore items, and this is where this sprite comes really handy, where each frame of the sprite corresponds to a different item of the game. Because now all we have to do for the sub image or frame that we want to draw of the sprite is just refer to whatever type of item is in this slot. So in sub image I'm just going to write global.inventory square bracket I. So if it's not -1, that means it's a value between like 0 and 3 hopefully. So it's just going to take that value and use that value to decide which frame of SPR underscore items to draw in the specific spot. And then as for the spot itself, I can go ahead and copy the x and y coordinate from where we drew the border, because it's going to be exactly the same, and then just close the bracket on the end there. And that's that, and that will draw any items in our inventory. It's really that simple. There aren't any items in our inventory yet, but I can very quickly add one just by going into our create event here, and after we set all our inventory slots to be blank. In fact, let me just show you that, like what it looks like when they're all blank. So you see now it's going through that for loop and it's drawing 5 empty boxes here. Now if I go in and say global.inventory, let's modify slot 2, which will be the third one technically because it starts at 0. Let's take slot number 2 and set that to equal, what item should we use? We'll use the yellow key, which is image number 3. So, I don't know, as it says at the top here. So global.inventory2 equals 3, and that means the third slot of our inventory should have a yellow key in it. Now if I run the game, you can see there it is, little yellow key has appeared in our inventory. It's as simple as that, and you could use that to sort of directly manipulate the inventory at any time. If you want to manipulate a very specific slot of the inventory to be a specific thing, all you need to do at any point in the game is do global.inventory, whatever slot number you want to modify, equals whatever item you want it to be. And that fundamentally already gives you the power to manipulate and control this inventory. But we're going to make things a little bit easier to manage than that in the long run. So what we're going to do now is create the tools necessary to add, remove, and check for items in this inventory object. Because this object by itself is essentially done. Like, that's all you need to manage and control a very basic inventory. It's not honestly that complex of a task. We've just created a list of variables that will contain a number that represents what type of item it is, and that's it really, and we're just using that array of variables to draw our items to the screen and so on. So anyway, the next thing we want to do is going to create a series of scripts that can add an item, remove an item, and check for an item, as I said. The first one I'm going to create is going to be scr_item pickup. Now, what this script is going to do is we're going to make it so that we can write anywhere in the game, or in any object, any code, anywhere, scr_item pickup, and as you can see it's turned yellow because it's recognized the name of the script, and then in brackets, whatever type of item we want to pick up. So if it was the yellow key, for example, item 3, we can just write that anywhere in code, and it will add the yellow key to our inventory. That's what we're going to do by creating this script, scr_item pickup. So how the script is going to work, we're just going to create another for loop using exactly the same setup we used before. We'll use this one a lot throughout this this tutorial. For I equals 0, I less than max items, I plus equal 1. So in this for loop, I'm going to say if global.inventory square brackets I, so if the specific slot is -1, meaning this inventory slot is empty, I can add that as a comment. If slot I is empty, open bracket, close bracket, then global.inventory I, I'm going to take that slot and say it to be equal to argument 0. Now, argument 0, it represents the number that we put in brackets whenever we call this script. When you create a script, essentially you're creating a custom command in GameMaker that you can call from anywhere else. So if I go back to our inventory object, and if I was to type somewhere in here, say at the top, scr_item pickup, you see it turns yellow, and then I can open brackets and send variables across to that script. So I could send over 4, and I could put commas in and send like multiple variables across, and then after doing that, when the script is running, it refers to those variables as arguments 0 through like about 9. So if I wrote argument 1, it would represent the second number. If I wrote 1 bracket comma 5, if I wrote argument 1 there, it would represent the second number I wrote when calling the script. But we just want the first one. There's only one argument for the script. It's argument 0. So we're going to set that specific slot of the inventory to equal whatever we sent to the script. Then after doing that, the script has succeeded at what it needs to do. It's found the first available slot, because it's cycling from 0 all the way to 5, or all the way to 4, sorry. So the very first free slot that it comes across is going to set that that slot to be that item, but then we don't want it to carry on the loop, otherwise it will fill up the whole inventory of this item. So I'm going to say return 1. Now by return tells, when you write return in a script, it ends the script at that point. So if this happens to be true, the slot is free, we add the item to the slot, and then we finish with the script. Now by putting 1 in here, it means the script sends back a 1 to wherever it came from. So if I were to do, it means we can set a variable to equal the script, and then the script will send that 1 back to that variable. So we could say test equal scr underscore item pickup 1, for example, or 2, or any of the item types that we have in SPR underscore items. And then assuming that works and it finds an open slot, puts the item in it, test is going to be set to equal 1, because the script is going to return 1 and put that into this variable. Then if we cycled through all of the slots in our inventory and we didn't find any empty slots, so our inventory is full, it means we're going to cycle all the way through the for loop and come after the for loop and say return 0, which will end the script after having not put any items in any slots, and we're going to send a 0 back. Now, just the benefit of doing this returning 1 and returning 0 means that when we add an item, we can say like add potion equals scr underscore item pickup 2, and then say if add potion equals 0, show a message saying the inventory is full. Because if add potion is 0, it means it tried to run the script, didn't find any available inventory slots, and therefore returned 0. If it equals 1, it means that it did find an inventory slot and it did fill that slot with inventory. So then you can use that to do other things in your game and say like, oh, the inventory is full, we couldn't add the item, and so on and so forth, and allows you to do things like that. And that's that for that script. So that's scr underscore item pickup. Now we can test that out real quickly. So at the moment, all our inventory items are blank. I got rid of the stuff we did earlier with the key. So, yep, they're all blank. But if in the create event of object inventory now, at the bottom, I say scr underscore item pickup, let's add the sword, so item 0. And if I copy and paste that, like 2 times, so like do that 3 times, we should end up with 3 swords in our inventory. Yep, there they are, 3 swords all lined up in our inventory. And now you can use that script anywhere in your game, any game object or anything like that. So that like, you could have a sword on the floor, for example, and like in the click event for that sword, you could just write scr underscore item pickup 0 and then instance destroy or whatever, and then that will add the sword to your inventory. Simple as that, and so on. That's why we made the script, so that you can start to actually do things with this inventory. The next script I'm going to do is very, very similar. scr underscore item drop. This script is going to start off with the exact same code as before. In fact, I'm just going to outright copy and paste it from this. So this is the exact same code as the item pickup script, but instead of checking to see if each slot is empty and then adding the argument to that slot, we're going to check to see if the slot of the inventory contains the item that we're looking for, which is argument 0. So we're going to look for a specific type of item, and the very first one we come across, we're going to remove it from the inventory by setting that slot to be -1 again. And then if it successfully does that, return 1. If it wasn't able to find the item in the inventory, return 0. Really is as simple as that. It's not if slot is empty anymore, but if slot I contains 0. So that's that one. So now we can see that one working. If I go back into object inventory, if I add that script again, so ser item pickup, we'll do the blue potion, item 2. We'll do that like 3 times again, so I'll just run that so you can see 3 blue potions in the inventory, and then I'm going to say ser item drop 2. The second item is going to find the very first slot with a blue potion in it, which will be slot number 1, or 0 rather, and it'll remove it from the inventory and set it back to -1. So yeah, we have like an empty space here and then 2 blue potions. Simple as that for removing items from your inventory, and then you can use that at any point, just as I explained with item pickup. Now the last one we're going to do is again almost the same. SCR underscore item check. Now this script is going to check to see if there is an item of a specific type in the inventory. So again, same. In fact, yeah, I'm just going to copy it again because it's almost identical. I'm going to go back to item pickup. I'm going to copy this, paste it into this, and now we're going to check every slot of the inventory just as before and say if that specific slot equals the item we're looking for, just as we did with item drop. So I can just say this again, contains argument 0. So really this code is identical to item drop, only instead of removing the item from the inventory, we're just going to do nothing, because we don't want to actually change the inventory in any way. We're just looking to see if this item is there. And if we do find one of these items, then we can return 1. We found it. Return 1 to say that we found that, and it'll exit the script at that point. Otherwise, it'll loop through each one, the if statement will never be true, and it'll get all the way out here, and it'll return 0 because it couldn't find one. And then all you would have to do, like, if you were looking for that item, is say, sword check, equals SCR underscore item check 0, because the sword equals 0. And then if sword check equals 1, that means we have a sword. So you can check your inventory to see if you have a sword by just doing sword check equals SCR underscore item check 0, and if that comes back 1, you do have a sword. If it comes back 0, it means you don't have a sword in the inventory. Simple as that. So yeah, with those 3 basic scripts and super simple object, and now I can so yeah, sorry, 3 basic scripts, super simple object, you now basically have everything you need to create a simple, versatile inventory system that you can hopefully modify and expand upon to fit more or less any kind of game with an inventory that you need it for. I'll cover some more stuff for the inventory a little bit later, involving like how to stack items and how to make items contain certain properties, like how to store an item's name, description, sprite, and so on, rather than just storing like a number to represent the item. But there's a lot you can do with that, really. I'll cover that a little bit later. But for now, this should be more than enough to get you going with basic inventory systems. One last thing, just to show off the system kind of working in real time, as opposed to just doing it on the create event, is I'm just going to add the keyboard letter P, the P key, so whenever the P key is pressed, in fact I want key press for this letter P, so whenever I press the P key, I'm going to add a potion to the inventory just to demonstrate how this would work. Now what I could do is just do ICR item pickup 2, and that will work. So if I run the game now, press P, I can fill up the inventory potions. Super simple. But I want to add something just to check to see whether or not the inventory was full when I tried to add the potion, so that I might, know not to destroy the potion I clicked on the floor, or etc. So I'm going to say var add potions, temporary variable, add potion equals scr underscore item pickup 2. So I'm setting this variable to equal the result of this script, which is going to be 1 or 0, depending on if it works or not. If add potion equals 0, then we know that the inventory is full. And so whatever you would want to do in here, maybe you'd want to show a message on the screen, or just avoid destroying. Maybe you want to check to see if it did work, and if it did work, destroy the potion item that you just clicked on the floor, so on and so forth. But yeah, that is that at the end of the day. That two simple events in one object and 3 scripts to help you manage it. That is the basics of how you do an inventory system, and also just how you use arrays at a basic level. Hope you guys enjoyed that. More coming on this sort of stuff soon, and I'll catch you guys next time. Thanks for watching. See you next time, guys.